We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Just waiting for people to join. Okay, folks, we're going to kick off with today's tutorial on the HRM Level 3 program and the Certificate of Business Management. Today's class is all about motivation. So let's start with this.
This stadium will have been waiting for. Time for the All Blacks to unleash the haka on Chicago. Great sporting theatre. Kieran Reid at the point of the arrowhead. And interesting to see the Irish lining up in a formation of a number 8, clearly in memory of...
One second. Okay, so what this video shows is the haka, which is the start of hi Elena, which is the start of any rugby match featuring the New Zealand All Blacks. Why did I want to show this to you? Nothing to do with the fact that we're playing the All Blacks tomorrow, and this will happen again. This session is all about motivation, and this, the haka, is a sorry, one second. The haka is a way that the New Zealand team kicks off every match. And what this does is it really sets the scene for the game to come. So in rugby matches, it's a contest. It's a sporting contest. It's a battle in one way. And the haka is an ancient Maori war dance or challenge at the start of any encounter. And what the New Zealand All Black team have adopted this, and it's become a key part of their build-up to the game. What's it got to do with motivation? Well, that's something we're going to talk about. I mean, motivation is a very misunderstood subject in some ways. We all think we know what it is. Say maybe sometimes we confuse it with inspiration. Maybe we think we can do it to other people. Maybe we think it's inherent in our individual capability and performance. But certainly what it seems to do in this situation, it really helps focus and gives the All Black team that extra edge at the start of every game. So much so that other countries who play the New Zealand All Blacks, sometimes they've complained that actually this is an unfair advantage, that they're given this opportunity to do it at the start of the game. It's not just the New Zealanders, the Fijians, Tongans, and the Samoans all do a haka before their games, their own version of it. And in many ways, it's a really important entertaining element, and it's very good for building up the game. And to be fair, other nations don't have a problem with it. They respect it and they stand up to it. The reason I chose to show it is that it has that ability to bring the event to boiling point. So it doesn't just work for the New Zealanders, it works for their opposition too. And I suppose that's what we're trying to achieve in business. We're trying to figure out, how do we get our teams to perform at that high level when it really matters? And is it leadership? Is it management? Is it carrot and stick? How do we get to that? How do we do that? That's what's, I suppose, so interesting about motivation. So let's move on to this. This is actually a picture of that team on this day before the haka starts. In fact, they're just starting it there. This particular match took place in Chicago, and here's the Irish team standing, watching the hakas when they're challenging it. What's really interesting is that on this particular occasion, Ireland had never beaten the All Blacks, and the All Blacks are the best team on the world. Ireland had never beaten the All Blacks, but this day was different. So the Irish team lined up in a figure 8. They had their own motivation to bring to bear that day. So a former Irish player and the coach of one of the big sides in Ireland, a guy called Axel Foley, had died a couple of weeks beforehand very suddenly. He was in his mid-40s. And he would have played with and known an awful lot of these players. So this was part of their mark of respect to him, because he played number 8 in the team. So they were remembering at the start, watching the New Zealand All Blacks do their haka. And this was the Irish approach, the Irish thing that helped to bring them to where they needed to be in the game. So you have motivation there, although in one sense it's pageantry or theatre in this particular setting. It's this idea as to, what do we do? How can we come together? How can we focus our attention and do the jobs we're supposed to do at the time we're supposed to do them, in the way we're supposed to do them, so that we work together and as a team, we achieve more as a team than we would be capable of achieving individually. The sum of the parts, the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's the essence of what we're trying to achieve from a leadership point of view, and motivation is a key part of it. So this is the second element within the HRM program, this which about human resource management. Last week we talked about, how do we identify and how do we work towards making sure that we've got the right people with the right skills doing the right jobs at the right time. Once we're past that, and we're going to deal with recruitment and selection as a module itself, but once we've got people recruited into the business, it's the next thing is how do we actually manage them effectively, and motivation is part of that. So then this class and next week's class deal with this idea of understanding how the organization motivates its employees and how we can manage their performance, how we can manage and measure and achieve the right performance. And that's what the focus of these two sessions are. Okay? So your assignment for this module, HRM assignment, is based on, it's 2 tasks, not 4 tasks like some of the others. It's 2 tasks. And the scenario for the first piece, which we kind of dealt with last week, was, the organization has recently won contracts and is looking to expand from 10 to 20 to add another 10 to 15 employees over the next 2 years. And we talked about some of the challenges there with that. So your task is to report on the internal and external factors that need to be considered when we're planning for human resources expansion. Okay, and we talked about things like organization building. So looking at the HR requirements. Okay, what do we need and when? Partly that was a function of job analysis, which meant we're in a position to define a job description and a person specification. Okay, and ultimately that means being able to produce recruitment advert, which helps us get applications into the role. Of course, central to that was being able to look at a skills audit. What skills are required within and across roles. Maybe looking at things like technology skills, leadership skills, or even communication skills. It's a whole range of skills. So that's what we kind of talked about in terms of task 1. Task 2 deals with the other 3 elements of the business, which is what we're starting to focus on now. The managing director has recognized that motivating and managing a larger workforce requires the use of a range of techniques, motivational and performance management techniques. So your job for your assignment is to produce a presentation and report on how the organization can motivate its employees, obtain their cooperation, and manage their performance. So I suppose you're looking at 3 things, how to motivate, okay, how to obtain cooperation, okay, and how to manage performance. All because what we're looking to do at the end of the day is achieve the organizational objectives. So there's an element in this which is about translating those organizational objectives into objectives for individual roles and units within the business. Okay. As part of this, however, of course, we're also required then to analyze the links between motivation and reward systems. So to do that, we need to know about theories of motivation, and that's what we'll be looking at today. Okay. And then we'll be looking at performance management. How do we start to link Well, as part of the theories of motivation, we're also going to look at how does that work in the workplace. So look, we're going to look at a case example with Kellogg's, and we're going to sort of look at your own sort of situation information as well. Okay. So the follow-on from that then is recommendations how we can improve performance and the use of management and measurement techniques. And finally, though, we're going to talk about, well, how do we obtain that cooperation? So it's all well and good to have a system in place. How do we sort of translate that, which kind of leads us into team management, which brings us full circle back to the likes of a sports team, such as the All Blacks or the Irish team or the Indonesian national team or the Malaysian soccer team or whoever. Okay. All right. So that's the assignment. So where does this fit in terms of HR system? Well, we talked about some of the elements. We talked about sort of recruitment and selection. We'll be dealing with that as a separate module. We kicked off elements on that last week and in the business resources module. We will at some point talk about training and development because that's an important part of the management of performance, as is performance appraisal and feedback. Within the HR system, of course, you also have to deal with pay and benefits. How much do we pay people? How much do they earn? And of course, we have to look at things like labor relations as well, all right, which is trade unions and so on. So as we look at this, we've kind of talked about recruitment selection. We'll talk about training development. We're now dealing with the sort of performance appraisal, paying benefits, and labor relations because they're all central to and affected by ideas around motivation. So what is it? Now, this is where I have a problem. And I think we all have a problem because I think we assume that motivation is something we can do to somebody, that I can motivate you to pass your exams, that I can motivate you to study, that your boss can motivate you to do certain elements of work. And I think that's a fallacy. I think this is one of the problems. I was reading a paper earlier this week, and the thesis in this paper, this academic paper, was that actually we don't really understand motivation. We don't really have a full grasp on what we're trying to achieve here. And the reason I say that is what their recommendation in this paper is that we kind of need to do an awful lot more research on motivation and about motivation across a whole range of things. And the reality is, we do not really have one central definition of what motivation is. We don't have one that really fits, that works for us. Motivation is a lot of things, and we're just not there yet in some ways. And I think part of that is that it's rooted in the idea that we can motivate somebody. The reality is, motivation is internal. So I like this definition, that it's the set of forces that cause people to behave in certain ways. Because that allows for the fact that a lot of motivation, a lot of things about motivation come from us. We do it because we want to. We do it because we feel we need to. We do it because we're going to get some sort of reward. So the idea that a manager can make people perform is short-sighted. Yes, we can have short-term impacts. And yes, really good managers and leaders can get the most out of people. But I think it's because they understand more about the set of forces that cause their people to behave in certain ways, rather than trying to force them to behave or trying to drive the motivation. I think the best managers and leaders understand that they need to know their people, and if they understand their staff, understand their team, understand their people, and understand what makes them tick, what makes them work, they have a better chance of putting in place and influencing that set of forces that cause people to behave. So in many ways, I think motivation is much more about influencing. Okay, and it's interesting that when we talk about social media now, we talk a lot about influencers. Influencers have great power and they make money. The Kardashians. Hands up, who knows about who recognizes the name of the Kardashians? Kim Kardashian. Anybody know anything about Kardashians? I have a book here somewhere. I can't put my hand on it. Does anybody know anything about the Kardashians? About Kim or Chloe? I'm not even sure if that's the right spelling. Yes? Okay. All right. Do I need to be careful, Alina, about what I say? I suppose for me, Kardashian was a particular type of character on Star Trek when I was growing up. But yeah, Kim and Chloe Kardashian and the mom, whose name I forget, and of course, one of them is married to some rapper, I think, and anyway, they've got lots of different things going on there. So they're very much influencers in the social media world. They have huge followings. And it's like the whole reality TV thing. Lots of people watch reality TV. Why? Because they're being influenced to a certain extent. And that idea of influencing is something that, there's ongoing experimentation with. But if we pull back into a business world and we talk about motivation, that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to influence the set of forces that cause people to behave in certain ways. That's what we're about. And if we can figure out some of that, well, then we stand a better chance of building high-performing teams. Now, if you play sports, how do you do well at sports? How do you win an Olympic gold medal? How do you win a world championship? How do you win a race in your local school? How do you win a local soccer tournament? What determines that? Yeah, you're exactly right, Alina. It comes down to hard work. You have to put the effort in. You don't become a world champion. You don't become a local champion. You don't become a winner, certainly a repeat winner, by luck. Who was it? Was it Gary Player, I think, said? Um, uh, the more I practice, the luckier I become. Okay? The harder you work at it, the more you have a better chance of getting there. So, of course, some people have talent, but that talent is useless unless they work with it and they build on it. And quite often, they need coaches, they need managers who help focus and tune and help them become better. But it does come down to hard work. So I think motivation as a topic, it's poorly understood in general, including within business. At the end of the day, if we're going to achieve, it's got to be a team effort. And if it's got to be a team effort, then you've got to figure out ways to understand what those forces are that affect people and their behavior, how you manage and influence those forces to get them to work in a certain way, to get them to put the hard work in so that you get to achieve the outcome that you're looking to achieve. And that's really what motivation is about, and what the study of motivation from our perspective should be. Because remember, what we're trying to figure out is, how do we get more sales? How do we produce goods better? How do we keep our costs down? How do we grow our business? How do we become more effective, better at what we do? We have to understand the set of forces that cause people to behave in certain ways. Okay? I think that's just critical to what we're trying to achieve. So we need to. So in the lecture, obviously, there's the I dealt with the theory, so I'm going to brush through these relatively quickly. Um, some of this goes back to two classical experiments, and that should be not Pavlov's dogs 7, it should be Pavlov's dogs and Skinner's rats. So these are two experiments that sort of helped influence our initial thinking on motivation around classical conditioning and operant conditioning. And in one way, this is where we start, but also we start to go wrong. because it's this idea that we can make somebody change their behavior, whereas actually, if we're more inclusive, we can influence them. So classical conditioning was based on an experiment done by, I think his name was Igor Pavlov, and he did a lot of experiments with animals, but it was all about trying to understand: is there a link between a conditioned stimulus and an unconditioned stimulus? Right? What occurs? So basically, in a nutshell, what Pavlov's experiment was, a dog will start to salivate when it sees food, when it's going to eat something. Okay, because that's what happens. Happens to humans too, to a certain extent. And what Pavlov wanted to do was he wanted to see, well, okay, that seems to be a natural reaction. So Pavlov started an experiment whereby when he was feeding the dog, he started to ring a bell or blow a whistle, a loud noise. And he did this for a little while. And, as he noticed, when the dog's been fed, he started to salivate. Then he introduced the noise, feeding the dog started to salivate. After a while, he took the food away and he played the noise, and the dog started to salivate. So this was a learned response, a conditioned response. Okay, so building a conditioned response, and based on that, of course, then the idea is that we can train people to behave in certain ways. You pull that forward. If we do certain things, we train them to do that. They will do that when there's this trigger in place. I'm not saying that everybody will respond to a whistle, but it's the same idea. You will respond if you know what you're going to want to achieve. Now, that's only works long term, only so long as actually you start to feed the dog again when you give the whistle. Because if the dog isn't getting fed, ultimately that behavior will revert. The other experiment was Skinner's rats. So Skinner was another behavioralist, and he was looking at the idea of operant conditioning, or what's called instrumental conditioning, whereby the strength of behavior is modified by punishment or reward, basically, by the reinforcement of punishment or reward. So in this case, rats were put into a little maze, and if they pressed a certain lever, they got a piece of cheese. So they go through this maze and they come across, and if they found this thing and they pushed it, they got a piece of cheese. So the rats learned, therefore, that if they kept pushing this, there'll be a pleasurable response. If they kept doing this, there'll be a pleasurable response. So this was operant conditioning, where they themselves are doing something to generate a solution. So these two ideas really have nothing to do with day-to-day work now, because we've moved on a bit. You would hope that our bosses wouldn't treat us like cats or dogs or rats. But they do illustrate some initial thinking, which was all about trying to understand, well, how do we get that outcome? How do we get that required behavior? And if I ask you the question, why do you work? What might be the answer? Why do you work? Why does anybody take a job? What do you think the answer is? Goodbye? Alina? Or Jimmy? Why would you take a job? What do you get out of it? Come on, folks. Plavone, why would you take a job? Why would anybody take a job? Do a job? There's not one answer. There are more than one answer, but there's a main one. That's fairly obvious. Yeah, okay. Well, that's certainly one answer, to gather experience. Yeah. Any other reason? To learn something new? Yes, of course. Yeah. What else? What's the single? May not be the most important, but the single most common. To get paid. Okay, we take a job, we expect to get paid. Okay, yeah, we may take some jobs just to get experience or to learn, like an intern. But in general, we take jobs because we want to get paid, because we want to buy something, we want to feed ourselves, we want to buy a house, we want to pay for our rent, we want to buy a car. There'll be some rationale which will help shape why we do something, why we take work with somebody. And that's, of course, for starting our own business, which is a different thing. So we do it for a reason. Okay, so it's that idea that there's some sort of action and reward, or action and outcome. Okay. So when we get to grips with this task, okay, the managing director has recognized that motivating and managing a larger workforce requires the use of a range of motivation and performance management techniques. We have to pay people. We have to get them to want to work. Your task is to produce a presentation and report on how we can do that. Okay, like I said earlier on. So you might think about, okay, well, let me think about a sample organization. Okay, how do they get people to do what they need done? What are the different elements? Why do the staff do what they do? What's the fundamental thing they're getting? Okay, so we need to start thinking about these things when you're looking at at the task. All right, and of course, as part of that, we have to answer those questions, but we also need to understand some of the theories which drive the choices that are available then to managers and employers and staff. Okay, and some of this goes back to early management theorists. So somebody like Frederick Taylor. And Taylor's idea was a scientific management. And he wasn't worried about employees per se. He was working on trying to figure out how best to get work done. How best can an organization deliver its work, its outputs. So he approached it from a scientific management point of view because he was an engineer. So he looked at breaking jobs down to small components so that people could focus on one element of the whole process. And if you can get them to do that, what his thinking was, you just pay them per unit. Therefore, if they do more, they get paid more. So it's quite a simple, linear understanding. Our focus here is on getting the work done as quickly and as effectively as possible. People have to be involved to do various parts of it. Well, you know what? We'll pay you for how much you get done. We'll pay you per unit. Now, I might be much slower at doing this than Elena. Okay. So actually, if I can get through 10 units in an hour and Alina can get through 15, she'd get paid more. That's the basic idea. They're paid for output. Okay. Now, as I said, Frederick Taylor's focus wasn't on people, it was on the process and the mechanics of it, if you like, the science behind it. Okay. So he's not a great source for us to understand modern motivation theory. But we got to understand that actually, this was the world that people were living in. Okay. Of more interest is the Hawthorne studies and a guy called Elton Mayo. Now, I think I covered this in the lecture, but I'll just recap this piece. Hawthorne was a factory. You see the sort of picture of it. This is about 100 years ago now, or more, outside Chicago in the US. So it's a manufacturing facility. And Mayo was a mechanical engineer or an engineer, just like engineering scientist, that sort of analytical background, just like Frederick Taylor. And he was part of a group that were doing ongoing experiments at the Hawthorne facility. So they've been brought in as consultants by the owners, by the industrial barons, to figure out, how do we get more done? How do we become more efficient? How do we increase productivity? And they did a lot of experiments. One of them is the one that people talk about all the time, but it wasn't just this one. But there was lots of experience to sort of back up what their findings were. And it was this idea that they split two groups. They had two groups doing the same job, producing similar outputs. And they said, okay, we're going to treat one group as a control group and one group as an experiment group. And they decided they're going to look at things like changing the light available, changing the layout, that sort of stuff. So one group over here in this room, one group over here in this room. And these guys, no change whatsoever. These guys, they reduced the lighting available in the facility. Now, and they're trying to do experiments at different light levels. What they expected to find was, as they reduced the light, that this group will become less productive compared to this other control group. Okay? That these guys reduce the light, they become less productive than these other guys. What actually happened was that both groups increased their productivity. Now, okay, these guys, the light goes down, but their productivity goes up. That's kind of odd, but okay. There's a change leading to an unexpected change, but this group, there's no change. They're the control group, and yet their productivity goes up as well. And this is the light bulb moment, to pardon the phrase, whereby they realize that, it's not the physical element. Of course, that can have a bearing, but it's the very fact that they're being observed, that there's a human interaction. So for these guys here who don't have any change in circumstance, but because they're being observed in their workplace, their productivity goes up. And it's that idea that actually there's a human element to this, not just a scientific element, not just a manufacturing pay per unit. Workers were best motivated. Now, this is the interesting language. Workers were best motivated by better communication between management and workers, by increased manager involvement in the workers' lives, in other words, greater attention received by the workers, and by working in groups or teams and not in isolation. Treating them like humans. That's what we're talking about. Treating them like humans. So Mayo and his cronies then came up with this idea that, actually it's the behavioral approach or the human relations theory that's much more relevant here. It's not the scientific management. If we understand our people better and we engage them better, we get more out of them. And they're a critical part of the system. So that was the birth, really, of the human relations movement of management, and very much led on to then a number of other theorists, research been carried out to try and work out, well, how exactly do we motivate people? Abraham Maslow is quite often the most known about, or the most recognized psychologist, because once we get into this human relations idea, then it's not mechanical engineers, it's psychologists and anthropologists are more valuable in terms of understanding motivation. So what Maslow talked about was this hierarchy of needs, that actually every one of us has needs, and that there's they come in at different levels. He's not saying that's always this way, but this is sort of a general model. We have physiological needs, so breathing, food, water, shelter. We have safety needs around, being safe, being able to sleep somewhere safely, about having our stuff protected, about having our family protected. We have love and belonging needs. We need friends. We want family. We have esteem needs. We want to feel good about ourselves, about what we're doing. We want the respect of others. And then we want self-actualization, that we have moral or creativity needs, that we want to solve big problems that we think are important. Now, we only get to deal with esteem or self-actualization if we've dealt with the earlier level stuff. So if we're not earning money, we're starting to have problems around getting food, getting shelter, getting security. Okay? So therefore, we shouldn't be thinking about self-actualization needs if we can't put a roof over our heads. So Maslow's contribution was, okay, well, if we understand that these are needs of people, then maybe we can manage their motivation by addressing those needs progressively. Look, let's deal with your physiological needs by paying you a simple wage, a living wage. And if we pay you enough, the first two levels are dealt with. You've got your basic physiological stuff and you've got your safety level stuff. So now they're That's your ability to survive covered. Now, let's look at the next stage. Well, actually, we want you to kind of belong to the organization because we think you contribute better. So we want to sort of manage that aspect of it. Now, if you're dealing with these things, now you're more of a happier contributor, a happier worker than if you're starving and you don't know where you're going to sleep tonight. And that's the idea. If we understand the needs, we can then figure out what we need to do as employers to help address those needs so that people will do what we want to do. So that people will do what we want to do. And that's the idea. That's how we can influence the behaviors necessary from our staff. Okay? And the same thing applies with a rugby team. We need people to perform at the right levels. We need people to practice and work hard and to do their very best in the match and to do what they've trained hard and hard and hard and hard to do. So we got to look after their needs to make sure they can focus on that. So Maslow's approach then was, well, if we look at these levels and these needs, well, we deal with it by things like a base salary or a pension plan, by encouraging friendships and enabling friendships at work. We deal with esteem by giving somebody a job title. We deal with self-actualization by allowing people to have challenging jobs so they can work out what their objectives are and work accordingly and achieve their self-actualization. So now not only do we have a recognition of what needs are, but now we've got some tools that we can use to address those needs and as a result, influence the motivation of the individual. It's not that we're motivating somebody, it's about we're removing the barriers to them achieving the performance that works for them and for us. That's what we're focused on. That's what the issues are. Okay? And there are other theories that look at these sort of things. I'm not going to talk about these now because we've covered them in the other lecture and you can read up on them. You can talk about Frederick Hertzberg's two-factor theory, which is linked kind of to Maslow, but it takes a slightly different approach, saying that, you know what, you can deal with these on different levels. You don't have to do it's not just sequential. You can actually have basic needs at the same time as having self-actualization needs. And that becomes more about trying to figure out how do we manage these various different factors of needs. And in many ways, his hygiene factors were, look, these are the basic things that we need in place to help with like a fair salary, safety, etc., before we get on to the other stuff. But, somebody can still be working towards some important, valuable, self-driving goal and still have needs over here. So Hertzberg's approach was, well, we can break these out and recognize that it's not linear. And therefore, if it's not linear, we can develop solutions that address different things at the same time. Okay? Expectancy theory is another sort of approach to understanding motivation, and it's based on understanding, well, look, let's figure out what the person's outcome, what the outcomes that we're looking for are, and how important they are, and working backwards from those outcomes, we're able to figure out, well, what's the performance we need from our people to deliver those outcomes. Now, once we know what the performance is, we need to figure out how we motivate people to deliver that performance. We also need to recognize that actually motivation can't solve the whole thing. Some of it is down to the environment. So we can't hold somebody's performance responsible for every single ability to achieve or not achieve an outcome, because part of what we need to do is to create the environment where they can do what we need them to do. Another part of that is making sure they have the ability. So maybe we need to provide training or education opportunities so that they can then apply the learnings within an environment that we create to enable this to work, and they bring the effort as a result of the motivation that we're helping to influence. And that's where performance comes from. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so if we capture those things, and what we need to realize now is, if we're talking about motivation, there's lots of different theories. There's not just one way to deal with this. There's lots of different theories. They are progressing and they're starting to recognize some more of the complexity. They still, though, don't really, well, they would start to address our broader thinking isn't settled on this one best way, because there isn't one best way. There can't be one best way because we don't really understand motivation enough. We probably never will, certainly not in our lifetimes. But if we understand that people have needs And we understand that actually individual motivation is based on a set of forces that help us move forward or backwards or sideways or whatever, then our focus should be on how we influence and enable those forces to do what we need them to do. Okay? And that's a kind of the essence of what we're about. So that's expectancy theory. And I'm not going to talk about McLaren's learned need. It's the same type of thing, the need for achievement and affiliation and power. This is kind of what we need to be thinking about. We need to be thinking about, well, what is the role? What's the performance we require? What are the metrics so that we can know if this is being achieved? And what are the rewards potentially are the influences we're going to bring to bear to bring about that performance? That's what we need to be thinking. I don't want to be just learning about this theory or that theory. We've got to start applying that now in terms of a practical, real situation. Okay? And so we're going to work on this. Okay? And some of that is figuring out how do we set the right goals. And it goes back to that expectancy theory. We kind of know what we want to achieve. We need this goal-directed effort to get the performance we require, right? And if somebody delivers that performance, well, then there are intrinsic and extrinsic rewards available to them, as well as satisfaction and a job well done. But the performance is the only piece that they can bring. We have to supply the organizational support, okay? We have to enable them to learn if necessary, because they're going to apply their individual abilities and traits. We're going to have to explain what the goals and objectives are and make sure they're bought into them so they can focus their behaviors on performance, so that performance is goal-directed, okay? We have to set the goals. And there's now an understanding what the goal difficulty is. If we can work at all of those elements, we can get to the required performance. And that's where something special can happen. Okay? So let me play some more rugby. Now, this is a situation. Well, look at the score there. France are 13 points, Ireland are 12 points, and there's 80 minutes in a rugby match. So there's 2 and a bit minutes to go, and France are leading. Okay?
Sexton missed one. Belleau has missed one. Then Sexton gets on with it quickly. Ireland trail. That's brilliantly caught by Ian Henderson. Ireland with just 2.5 minutes.
Now, you don't need to understand the game.
Their way. Dundee Aki. It's a good tackle.
He's using soccer, obviously.
On the centre. Sean Cronin on a hooker for Ireland. France with a player down on the 10-metre line. It's Kevin Gaudon.
Now there's 2 minutes to go.
Johnny Sexton with a little half break, but they're still inside their own half. Rob Carney hangs onto it. Dan Levy. Dundee. Gaudon is still down, and the play after Sean Cronin's little probe is going to come his way.
In rugby,
Robbie Henshaw.
When the time is up, play will continue until the ball goes down. Until somebody commits a foul or breaks the rule, or until the ball goes down off the pitch or whatever.
Just over a minute to go. Ireland can't get in to the French half. Conor Murray to Levy. France's discipline, good so far. Number 5, Sébastien Varmina has given away a handful of penalties on his own. He's staying well away from danger.
Should have given the ball there, just Gordon on the right wing is limping.
Oman presents it again, but they're still stuck in their own half.
You haven't got across the ground halfway.
Levy came close and couldn't really help. Sexton, big toner, big target for Varmina.
Now they've had 17 phases.
Robbie Henshaw.
Okay? 17 times this little rook has formed on the right.
The closing seconds of the
now
match.
Approaching the halfway.
Is there one more little
10
twist?
seconds.
to this match. Ireland up to halfway. We're into...
Now, at this point, time is up. 80 minutes is gone. So the clock goes red. Okay? They're allowed play on because in rugby, as I said, the game isn't over until the ball goes dead, until somebody drops the ball. You're not allowed to drop the ball. You're not allowed to pass the ball forward. You're not allowed to be offside. You have to stay on the pitch, obviously. So if the ball goes off the pitch, or somebody's in touch off the pitch with the ball, or they drop it, or they knock it on, these are all reasons to stop the game. And the next time it stops, the game is over. All right. It's taken them 20 phases. This type of thing here is a ruck to get to this stage. Okay. Now, this is a team that's been training and developing, both teams. So, training and developing because there's a performance requirement, just the same as there's a performance requirement in NASA or in SpaceX when they're looking to launch a rocket. Just the same as there's a performance requirement in terms of running a factory that's building cars, right? Or in a restaurant that's serving meals. There are performance requirements. We need things to happen at certain times in certain ways to certain standards. This is a sports event, but it's the same idea.
Overtime. Ian Henderson. Aki. France's defending has been excellent. Ireland still in possession. Sexton, he risks the kick. Keith Earls rises high. Vakatawa stayed off him, didn't dare touch him in the air.
Now, they made ground there, but that was very risky because obviously, if you have possession, you're in control. If the opposition, when the blue guys had caught the ball, they're in possession. They have the ability then to recycle the ball and to kick the ball off the pitch, to send it dead, match over. Okay? So you've got to keep possession.
Ireland now deep into the French half. John Ryan.
10 more yards and they'll probably be in drop goal range.
Sexton is down though, the drop kick expert is down on the ground, back on his feet now. It's still a long way out for the drop goal. Guillaume Guirado, the French captain, looks on from afar as big Devon Toner up beyond the 10-metre line. Peter O'Mahony. At what point do Ireland risk the kick? It's a long, long way out.
Please, Turkey,
They have to get closer than this. France's defence, excellent, through Danny Plizeau's 17.
Now 1.5 minutes overtime because they've kept the ball alive. Simple, completing the task time and time again.
Heavyweight tackling by Gomez Sarr. Bundy, Aki. France's defence still keeping Ireland at the halfway line. Fergus McFadden wearing 23 involved. Here's another replacement, Dan Levy.
2 minutes now. 2 minutes over. And they've gone, maybe 30 yards. Okay? Everybody must be exhausted. They can't afford to drop the ball. They have to keep control all the time. They've got to keep their performance going. At the same time, the French are doing all they're supposed to be doing right. They're hitting the tackles and stopping the Irish team where they can.
Peter O'Mahony, we're back up to the 10-metre. Look at the phases, 36 of them. Sexton, infield or inside to Henderson.
Coming up at 2.5 minutes over now.
Henderson again. Creeping closer to the point at which a drop goal becomes possible. Sexton waits, here it comes. It looks good, he likes it, Nigel Owen's arm goes up, and Ireland.
And that's it. They kept their calm, they kept their composure, they kept doing what they had been trained to do time and time again. No mistakes, kept it straightforward, kept crawling their way up the pitch. Something like nearly 41 phases, okay? Up to that point where they were able to attempt to score the points that would put them ahead and help them win the match, okay? Performance. So when we talk about motivation, yes, of course the team wants to win, and it's easier in a sporting environment. As Aline has said, you work hard, you want to win, okay? But they're working together as a team. So they all know their jobs because they've practiced, they've done the hard work. They know the focus, they don't lose their head, they keep their head in terms of saying, not trying to finish it off really quickly, because they know the rules that, okay, once you keep the ball and keep it alive, you keep going forward. And so they build and they build and they build and they build all the way up. So this was a wonderful match to watch live, obviously, as you can imagine, because it could have gone either way. In fact, it should have gone the French way. But because of the way they approached us and because they were very disciplined and they delivered what they were supposed to do, the team delivered because the individuals delivered, because they've been trained. So motivation in this case, it came from all of them, as well as the direction in terms of making sure they were practiced and drilled and holding their cohesion, holding themselves together and doing what they've been trained to do to deliver the required performance. So as an illustrative example, it's really interesting to see, that's apart from the fact that it's obviously a sporting event and that it's Ireland and Ireland win, it's that idea that, we can influence, and the manager can only influence by setting the tone, by setting up training, by talking about what it's going to take, by getting the captain and the players together and, envisioning what they want to achieve and where they want to go. Okay. So all of that helps to bring about the results that we're looking to achieve. So to go back to the slides to finish off on, we talked to a few of the theories. It's trying to figure out how do we apply those theories, whether it's goal-directed performance, whether it's, Maslow's hierarchy or Hertzberg's hierarchy in terms of taking away those subsidiary needs. So these guys need to perform. So yeah, they need to be able to know that they've got time for practice. They need to get their monies are dealt with, so they can, they've got somewhere to live. They've got their training schedules. They don't have to worry about going off to a job. All those bits and pieces are looked after, so they can focus on what needs to be delivered here. Okay, and then we then have to do this within an organizational setting. So. And we can do this in any organization. We figure out what do we want to achieve, what are the things that we can bring to bear in terms of influencing. So that idea of, influencing the element. Which theories that support? Well, we can apply Maslow or Hertzberg or whoever, but we've got to figure something out like this to try and get through and deliver the objective at the end of the day. And we might turn around and we might say, what the one element is, well, you know what, we need staff on duty during opening hours. Okay, simple. Okay, well, how do we influence that? Well, we offer a pay for attendance. Okay, that might be the first thing we do, and we also might, penalize late arrival, somebody not turning up on time. Now, what theory are we talking about there? Well, we could be talking about Maslow in terms of the pay, right? Addressing basic needs. Okay, that's the reality. Okay, if we were talking about, excellent customer service, maybe what we want people to do is we want our staff to go the extra mile. So to go the extra mile, for our customers, okay, maybe what we need our staff, well, we need to make sure that they've got effective training. Okay, we need to look at things like how we set the right attitude. Okay, And part of that might be talking about, well, there are bonus schemes, which goes back to pay, okay? And there are promotion opportunities, okay? And we might look at some certain job titles. Again, so some of this could be Maslow, it could be Hertzberg, okay? It can be Path Go Path. Okay, so there are different theories that we can apply on this. So from our point of view, your task for this module, you've got to figure out these things for the organization. So you can choose an organization that you're using in one of the other exercises. I think that's a wonderful idea. And using that, then try and pick a couple of job roles and talk about some of the elements that the organization is looking to do to achieve. And with that, identify some of the influences. You can talk about the theories. The theories are only benefit an option to sort of illustrate your knowledge. But really, it's, well, using the theories, how do we make sure our people do what they need to do? Well, break it down. Well, what are their basic needs? What are their hygiene needs? What are their self-actualization needs? And see, well, what does the organization do to try and influence those? That's what this is about. Okay? All right. I'm going to finish there. There's an example in terms of Kellogg's. What I've uploaded is, and I'll upload on the WhatsApp, is this 2-page thing around a description of Kellogg's, which is the cereal company. And there's this piece here, these 3 slides, which talk about how Kellogg's has actually applied some of these theories in its organization, and how it affects its ability to manage its staff and keep its staff happy and keep its staff productive. All right, any questions? No? If you haven't submitted an assignment, please don't hesitate to submit your assignments from last week, which are due, and we will take it from there. All right. I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday for round 3 on business resources, and Friday for round 3 on HRM. Okay. Thank you. And by the way, Ireland are playing the All Blacks again tomorrow morning in the World Cup quarterfinal, morning my time, so it's evening your time, just in case you don't have anything else to do. All right. I will see you next week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. As always, if you have questions, you can get me on the WhatsApp.